One of the best experiences you can have is to go into something with no expectations, maybe even being a little bit apprehensive, and then really enjoying it. And that was definitely the case with the heroic legend of Arslan. I was just kind of flipping through my anime list one day, and I was looking, I think it was at like medieval or fantasy or that kind of anime. And this one popped up, the heroic legend of Arslan. I'm like, that's kind of a weird name. It reminded me a bit of Vinland Saga, so I went in and I looked at it, and almost immediately I was like, oh, okay, this looks kind of interesting. We have this pseudo historical narrative that takes place in the country of Mesopotamia. I like the character designs. I like the art style. Looks like there's lots of politics, going to strange, wonderful places, military stuff, secret plots. It sounds pretty cool. So I started to watch it, and almost immediately, how I would describe this series is, let's say you take the Blu ray of either Vinland Saga or Legend of the Galactic Heroes, and then you convert that into like a low res format and put it on Laserdisc. Does anyone here remember what a Laserdisc is? But you put on a Laserdisc, and that's basically what Arslan is. It's very similar in a lot of ways to Vinland Saga, and while I haven't seen it, the friend of mine who I watched this with said that it reminded him quite a bit of Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Now, obviously, it's not as good as either of those, but being the inferior version of things that are considered to be some of the best anime series of all time is not a bad thing. And even if this is maybe not a masterpiece, it's definitely good. And this is something I would really recommend to people who don't normally maybe like anime. While it is an anime and it's done in an anime style, the story is a lot more kind of your typical, heroic legend, your typical historical epic, um, trying to be at least a little bit grounded in politics and military reality and stuff like that. And while there's some fantasy elements, it really does feel like something that anybody could have written, like that a Western author could have written, as well as a Japanese one. What I mean by it not being like super anime ish is a lack of reference to things you have to know something about modern Japanese culture, like Chinibyo or Hikikimoris or otaku culture or something to really understand what's even going on. This is not like that at all. So, what is the story of the heroic legend of Arslan? So, as I said, it takes place in the country of Mesopotamia. That's a joke I came up with a couple of years ago, in which anything that takes place in like a vague medieval fantasy setting, I say it takes place in the country of Europe because it looks like it's kind of Europe, but not really. It's just this awkward generic version of Europe. So this takes place in not Mesopotamia. Now, the main kingdom we have is Pars. Now, there's no points for guessing what Pars is based off of, but it seems to primarily be based off of the Achaemenid Empire, but with a variety of stuff from just other Iranian dynasties. They are currently the most powerful known civilization in the world. They occupy the principal trade route linking east and west above the not Persian Gulf and below the not Caspian Sea. They appear to be a feudal, somewhat decentralized society, wherein the local lords almost rule like their fiefdoms like independent kingdoms, and they are known for their cavalry, for having the best cavalry in the known world, and for having a series of strong warrior kings. So once again, it's not exactly based on the Persians, but it's very close. It's definitely that is what they were going for, but not exactly once again. And they're surrounded by other peoples who are kind of familiar, but not exactly. To the southeast, you have Sendura, which is populated by not Hindus who ride elephants and wear turbans and have constant palace intrigues and succession crises. You have these strange barbarian peoples from the north who are called Turks or Turans. And then you have probably the one that has the least historical direct reference to this time period, that this being the ancient time period long before Islam in the Lusitanians, but we'll get into them in a second. So our main character Arslan is the son of King Andragoras, the third, who was raised, I think, largely as a commoner. His father really, really hates him. Andragoras is a massive dick. What's worse than him being a dick, though, is he's very incompetent. And we see this very early on in the series. He's just very cruel, pompous, pig headed. He refuses to listen to advice from anyone. People fear him, but no one really respects him. And he's more or less left his heir to his own devices and hasn't really done anything to try to shape him into being his successor, into being the next king. He's also a massive simp for his frigid wife that he killed somebody to get, but once again, that's another thing. So our story starts out with the Lusitanians invading Pars. Now, the Lusitanians are kind of, I think they're supposed to be based primarily on the Crusaders. Although, given the time period we're in and the location, it would make more sense for them to be based on the ancient Jews. Their aesthetics are very Christian in appearance, but they remind me a lot more of Old Testament Jews in a lot of ways than they do Christian. So they dress largely like medieval knights, and they believe that their god Yaldabaoth has given them the grand commission, or the goal, or the purpose of conquering the entire world, destroying all fake and false religions, and bringing all humanity towards the worship of Yaldabaoth. Now, if memory serves, Yaldabaoth is the name of the demiurge in Gnosticism. Actually, it's kind of funny in Overlord because you have the one character named Demiurge, and when he's assuming a fake identity, his fake identity is Yaldabaoth. But they have a set of scriptures very similar to the Bible that they read from, and they're portrayed largely as religious fanatics. Now, this is probably the weakest point in the show. As with most things Japanese, it has this very negative portrayal of any kind of organized religion. Well, some of the characters are religious, and we have Ferengiz, who's a priestess of Mithra, who joins them. Generally speaking, the idea of like a hierarchical church and people who are devoted to the faith are kind of viewed as being somewhat negatively. At the same time, though, there are some Lusitanians who do believe in the religion, who are decent people. Their hearts just are in the right place, but they're being manipulated, or they're wrong about something, or there's cynical people from behind the scenes who are using the religion as a tool of conquest. So they decide to invade, to destroy Pars, and forcibly convert the kingdom. We have spoilers going forward. They win a massive battle very early on and destroy most of the Parsian army, largely because King Andragoras is retarded and decides to charge in to an obvious trap. So that gets taken down. The capital falls. The Parsian Empire has collapsed. Our main character, Arslan, manages to get away. With Andragoras and his queen now in chains, the Lusitanians succeed in taking over the capital. Their religion teaches that slavery is wrong because all men are equal before God. So Pars is very heavily dependent upon slaves. So they're able to leverage a slave uprising to take a lot of the major cities, and more or less they conquer Pars with very little trouble. Although some of the border regions, because they're so autonomous, hold out. Now, Arslan manages to survive the battle without getting captured, along with a Giga Chad named Daryun, who you can see here, who's also known as the Black Knight, I believe. Or rather, Knight in Black, who's generally considered to be the greatest warrior in the show. And Arslan kind of sets out to try to retake his kingdom, to free his father, to drive the Lusitanians out, and to rebuild Pars. And very early on, he comes across Narcissus, who I get a very Chinese kind of feel from. I know he doesn't look Chinese, and this isn't really cultural. He reminds me of a lot of, I'm pretty sure he's based on Sun Tzu, or like a Chinese philosopher general. So he's kind of like the Grand Admiral Thrawn to Arslan, and he's the one who always has the plan, who always comes up with the strategies, who's always like 4 steps ahead of everybody. And he's really likable. Later on, there's like this barbarian QT who falls in love with him and claims that they're married, and that's all very funny. But as time goes on, we start to build up Arslan's posse. So we have Daryun, who's a Chad. We have Narcissus, who's like the pretty but really intelligent guy. You have Ferengiz, who is, yeah, just pure fan service. I mean, just look at her. She's a priestess of Mithra. I like to think that she's Circassian, but I don't really know, to be honest. But she's actually quite likable. She is a archer and she does a lot of kind of the ninja stuff for the team. There's this one guy, what's his name again? Give, who's like a ladies' man, and he's kind of like a bard, rogue, jack of all trades kind of guy. Overall, you just kind of have a very good, a good kind of mix of guys that form up along Arslan as time goes on. He also gets there's this Indian guy who becomes his like right hand man, like his personal bodyguard. And as I said, as time goes on, he just gathers more and more people to him. And I find Arslan to be a really good, interesting character. It's because very early on, people are concerned that he is weak because he's a very kind, generous, gentle person, and they're concerned that he wouldn't be strong enough to rule the kingdom. And Narcissus basically said, "Look, Andragoras was strong, and he fucked everything up. We've had all kinds of strong kings in the past who have led the kingdom into war and ruin. I'm willing to give a kind king a chance." I'd rather take a chance with that than have another loser like Andragoras run the country. He's young, and Arslan is somebody who grows a lot because he is somebody who's very willing to listen to advice, to change his mind on things, to learn his lessons. Like he's willing to take his hits and then come back later and not fall for the same thing twice. And I think like the progression of the series, the thing that I really enjoy about it, like I said, is watching Arslan go from being basically a boy to a man, getting his posse together, trying to get an army together, trying to get the lords in line, trying to. There's like a whole segment where they go off to Sindara and intervene in the civil war there to try to get support, and just kind of playing the whole political game. And it is very interesting. Something that I do like is Arslan's leadership style. Narcissus teaches him this, but very early on he learns that despite being king, he doesn't have to do everything himself. Oftentimes, one of the most important traits of leadership is being able to pick good people to serve under you. Being able to pick out people who are loyal and also competent and who aren't going to backstab you is perhaps the single most important trait a leader can have. Because you can't do everything. You can't be a master general. You can't be like a master warrior. You can't be a lawyer, an administrator, or a priest. I mean, some men like Napoleon have the talent to do all of these things, but even then, there's only so many hours in the day. And so, to be very effective, you have to get together the brain trust, get together a team of people with complementary talents and know when to trust them and know when to micromanage them and when to just let them do their own thing. But I think Arslan's very good at this. He's a good judge of character. He's good at telling when somebody has a lot of potential, when that person fundamentally has a good heart, or somebody who he thinks can be redeemed to join his cause. And he knows when to listen to the person, wherein he will make his own decisions. He has his own ideals and his own dreams and stuff like that. But if somebody makes what he considers to be a good point, then he will concede it and go along with it. And I think at a certain level, you might say that this could be seen as weakness because he kind of does whatever Narcissus tells him to do. But at the same time, it is kind of reasonable. Narcissus is the greatest military thinker of his generation, and he's substantially older than Arslan. Arslan, I think, is like 15 or 16 at this point in time, and he wasn't really raised for becoming king. He's a pretty good fighter and he's well educated, but he's not particularly he didn't sit in on royal councils and stuff like that growing up. So he gets that he's inexperienced, and like I said, he's willing to pick people who he knows he can trust, who know what they're doing, and learn from them, and give them the freedom and autonomy to do what they want. He's very much an inspirational leadership style, so people just like him. He has a lot of charisma. He's very kind. He's very likable. people are just kind of drawn to him and are willing to fight for him and believe in him. Later on, when his father comes back and basically exiles him, his inner circle all decide to come with him, even though they're probably some of the most important people in the kingdom. Daryun is obviously the best fighter in the kingdom. Narcissus is the best military leader. A bunch of other people decide to go with him because they believe in him and in his vision for the future. There's the old question, is it better to be feared or loved? I generally speaking think it's better to be loved because if people love you, you don't have to look over your shoulder as much. If somebody loves you and they're loyal to you and you're reasonably sure about their loyalty, you can turn your back to them and expect them to not stab you. Whereas if somebody is only fearful of you, then they will take the first chance they can get to double cross you, to betray you, to stab you in the back. It's good to have a little bit of both, but it reminds me a little bit about of Duke Leto in Dune, which something that kind of irritated me in Dune Part 2 is the Emperor said that he killed Leto because Leto was a weak man, which is not really true at all. Was Leto a bit naive, and did he kind of go into a trap and he didn't consider certain things? Yes. But the Atreides, um, because of their honor, their commitment to justice, the way that they treated their men fairly and like members of the family, they were always like a father to their men. They were always good to the people of Kaladin and stuff like that. They inspired immense loyalty to themselves. Whereas the Harkonnens ruled through fear, the people of Kaladin were like fanatically pro Atreides. All of their men loved them. They were willing to die for them. The Duke was this charismatic man who everybody loved, who the Landsrod was wanted basically to be the next emperor because of his perceived goodness. And you can say that that's weakness, but at the same time, if you're the Baron Harkonnen and literally everybody in the universe hates you, all the other great houses, all of your people, you have to spend your entire life basically looking over your shoulder. Whereas with Leto, he may lack a lot of the basic cunning, but the amount of love and loyalty that is comes out of the people around him, and his ability to get together a team of like Gurney and Duncan and Thufir, and I didn't work out, but Yui and stuff like that, and to provide kind of the best education he could for his son, to have him as a well-rounded ruler. I think on the whole was pretty successful, and the emperor in the book loved him like a son. Like he thought that he wished that he was his son. He thought he was this like great guy, and ultimately he had to kill Leto, not because he hated him or thought he was weak, but because he was so strong and because he was such a charismatic figure. Now, the heroic legend of Arslan does not cover the entirety of the novel's story. The first season covers Arslan basically getting an army together, and eventually his father breaks out of prison at the end of season one. And season two is he gets exiled and he's going to try to raise an army for his father. As that was the condition, unless he raised an army, they wouldn't allow him to come back from exile. His father is very ungrateful and basically says that he's a traitor because only the king of Pars can lead an army, and Arslan's only the crown prince. He's not the king, and he should have waited till he got out of jail, out of prison, before he raised an army. And so he gets kicked out. And in season two, like there's kind of a mini arc that happens during it where they go to a port city and do a bunch of like fun diplomacy, and there's pirates and stuff like that. But it really just kind of ends like going nowhere. Like the season two isn't bad or anything. It's not even like it ends on a cliffhanger. It just kind of stops. It feels very much like half a season. I think it is like half a season. Like they just ran out of money halfway through it and they just ended the series. And it's too bad because season one was really good. Season two is not bad or anything. It's just only half done. Now, from what I've read about the books, they get really weird, and the ending of like the 10 novels or whatever sounds absolutely horrendous and awful. So maybe it's a good thing it stopped where it did. I would have liked it at least have the main arc that was going on get resolved, like where Arslan retakes the capital, maybe his father dies and he becomes king. Whatever the current thing was going to go before we move into the next meta plot. But on the whole, it's a show I really like, and it's something I would recommend, and definitely something that if you are looking for maybe a more historical oriented anime. Once again, this isn't our world, but it's very heavily based off of it. So on the whole, I recommend Heroic Legend of Arslan. Give it a try.